I can end up with more than one photo there. And notice that it automatically rotated the top picture to make it fit better. And that's where this checkbox called Rotate to Fit comes in. If I didn't turn that on, it would always keep things upright. But choosing Rotate to Fit makes it where if it would be able to make the image larger by rotating it, it will do so. So anyway, I can bring up the number of rows, the size I'd like, and the number of columns to really define how many images might be printed on a single sheet. But right now, if those images happen to be the same proportions as these little grid areas, they'd be touching each other. So we have cell spacing, which means how much space would I like to have between those cells. And then if I need to define the cells manually, I can do so here with cell size, but those numbers will change as I change the vertical spacing, cell spacing, and as I tell it to use more pictures, those numbers automatically change. You don't have to go in there and specify it yourself. You could just leave them alone. Right now I have the guides visible, so you can tell why it's moving the images in certain amounts. If I turn that off, you'll see more like what you're going to get when you actually print the image. Those guides are just telling you that, okay, if there's two guides in between pictures, you must have cell spacing turned on, because that's what would cause that. If you have a guide near the edge of your picture, let's zoom up here, you have this one, you must have a margin turned on, and that's what's pushing that in, another margin pushing this down. And it's just telling you that all those settings that you're applying to your images are causing the images to be pushed into these gray lines. Those don't print in general, and if you don't want to see them on your screen, you could turn off that checkbox. Sometimes it's useful, though, to see them so you can tell why things are being pushed in certain amounts. Now here we have the page as a whole, and here's where I can choose a background color. So if I don't want there to be white between these images, I just click there, and to the right there's a rectangle where if I click on it, I'll get a color picker. And in that color picker, maybe I want a black background, or maybe I want a gray background, whatever it may be. I'm going to leave it on white, though, because I want it to look a little more simple. Then, do you remember earlier today, I think it was near the very beginning of the day, we set up something known as an identity plate. And the identity plate shows up at the top of Lightroom on the left side, right here. That isn't just used for that area, though. You can use it in other parts of Lightroom. One of those areas is when you're printing. Here we have a checkbox for identity plate. If you turn it on, you'll see it right in the center of your document. And I can control if it's going to be 100% opacity. I can scale it up, so if I want it really big, maybe it's going to be a copyright notice or something else, because you can set up more than one identity plate. And I can control the opacity if I want you to see through it, so you can see the little image that might be under there. Because it might be that I want to deliver to a client some proofs. And they're going to look at those images, but they don't get to keep them, or if they do keep them, they're supposed to throw them away. And I don't want them to use it as their final image. In this case, it doesn't make as much sense when I have a grid where I have multiple images. But if I come out here and just take the number of rows and columns down to 0, so we have a single image, and if I were to adjust that to get this to be a bit bigger, then it might make sense to be able to have my identity plate on top of it at a low opacity so that somebody doesn't think they should be able to use this and put it in a frame and put it on their wall. Instead, it look ridiculous with my identity plate. But it might be good enough for somebody to look at it and evaluate the color and tell me if they want me to do further retouching and adjustments without being able to grab that image and use it as their final image. So it makes a little more sense when it's on a single picture than it does when you have more than one on a grid. You can make it render behind the picture, and that would possibly be more useful when you have a grid of images. And it could be a copyright notice or something else. It would show up in the gaps in between those images. Whereas here, behind the image, it just disappears because the image is covering it up. The other thing I could do is, let's say that I have that with multiple images on the page. So I'll bring up the number of rows and bring up the number of columns.